Welcome to the Mental Insights podcast. This is your host, Brennan Catuli, and we're here today for episode number 14. And we have a great guest today, Brandon Barile, who is a leader amongst empowership and empowerment and emotional learning. And he provides 3 great programs that we're going to be speaking about, where he tries to really uncover emotional learning and workshops and classes within a wide variety of ages. And what he does is really incredible, promoting a lot of skill sets that everybody needs within their life. So I'm really excited to dive deep into the work that he does and share more about why he's in this field and why he's so passionate and helping others and creating such a big change within our future generation today. So Brandon, if you just want to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about, what you do today and what you enjoy outside of your work as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I got into this field, the field of higher education. So I work primarily with students, traditional undergraduate age, at a small private liberal arts college in upstate New York. And most of my conversations around students was about student behavior, right? Why are you making this choice? Typically Friday and Saturday night type of behavior, right? And we would address the incident itself and then talk about how you repair the harm to a community, or how you maybe learn about alcohol use or misuse, how alcohol or drugs might affect your body, how your choice to be loud on a Friday night impacted other people on the floor. What I was finding myself more interested in as I was having these conversations was, what are people thinking about? Why are they thinking that way, right? When somebody has an active intolerance around somebody on their floor, maybe it's related to gender or race. What do they believe about other people that are not like them? Why are they thinking the way they think? And it started also with the idea of social class, right? How does somebody navigate the college experience? I was a first generation college student. What did I think about my opportunity to attend college, to attend different types of college versus somebody who had the means to attend any college that they want, or even the preparation to attend any college they want. And as I'm now in my 15th year in higher education, 15th plus year, I started to think a few years ago, how do I get to that thought process and why people think the way they think? And that's where personal empowerment, a course here at my college, began. It was, how do we adjust how people have misperceptions about their environment, about their self-worth? How do we adjust the belief systems that impact a student's everyday experience? And once that took off, and we reach about 200 students every year now at a small institution such as the college where I work, of only about 2,000, that's a pretty large number. Within the last 2 years, I started to say, how do I spin this off to be things outside of college? How do kids who are just learning about how to interact with others learn how to communicate their feelings? How do I get this message to them? When I think about leadership training and professionals entering the workforce, how do we give them the feeling that they are worth the job that they have, that they will make mistakes, and that's okay, that's how we learn. So with a successful institute in higher education, I started to think about, how do I spin that message off to other people? And I have a really great testing ground. I have a daughter who is 9 years old, who puts my empowerment magic to test every day, along with my partner, who every now and then I'll give a message and say, we need to really think about how we're approaching this, or we need to think about where these people that we're talking about on Facebook come from. And then every now and then I participate in negative behavior and he turns that around right on me. So it's great to have this mindset, the personal empowerment mindset, and to take that and look at society through different lens, either through sexuality and gender around empowerment and authenticity, or elementary school students. We're inviting 300 of our local second graders this Friday to campus to talk about personal empowerment. So the lens has changed over time, but the passion has been the same.
That's incredible, Brandon. And I think it's so incredible because it speaks volumes about the person that you are and why you're so passionate about what you do. Because as you were speaking, it shows that, you start off with, you're working with the higher education of young adults, and you say, all right, I want to create change. I want to understand why they're thinking this way. But then you start piecing these building blocks together and say, all right, how can I then create bigger change within a younger audience? Because then they grow further, and the impact that a younger audience does to the people and their community is so wide, and it creates that much more impact, and it creates such a larger audience of change. And just even that voice of you saying, all right, I want to empower these people and I want to create that change, speaks absolute volumes. And I think it's so incredible, and so, just inspiring to see that you wanted to not only create change within, the way people think, but you wanted to fully understand it. And I think I relate to that as well, because I like to try and see how people think and why people make the decisions that they do. And like you were saying, like with your partner and with your daughter, you can pick that up very quickly. And having those relationships that people want to build off of is so important, because I think, when you do one of those negative, emotions or actions, then someone picks on it that you necessarily wouldn't have. But having that person there who's that passionate and that driven for it is incredible. And I think just what you do is incredible, because you're creating that change within all your relationships around you. And it's obviously so impactful within your partner, within your daughter, and all the students that you serve so far. So it's absolutely awesome to see what you do, because I'm so passionate about serving others as well. But the amount that you're able to touch, the lives that you're able to touch is so important, and it's so great to see. And if you want to touch more about how your passion really began, when did you say, why did I want to join the field of higher education? And even when did you realize that you wanted to serve others?
Sure. So, I'm very indecisive. So when I was an undergrad, I changed my major something like 7 or 8 times. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, right? But the idea of standing in front of a classroom, I wanted to be a secondary education teacher. So I wanted to go into teaching high school. I had a passion for history. So the plan was go to college, declare a major, social studies education. And then I started writing and reading some novels that I had never interacted with before. And I said, great, I'm going to add English education. So I added that because I'm indecisive. And then I realized, the field was changing in public education. And there was a huge call in New York State for a lot of classrooms that had teachers that were qualified and certified to teach inclusive classrooms. So I added special education, a third major. I was like, how is that going to happen? Who knows? Then I dropped social studies ed, and somewhere along the lines, I needed money. I became an RA, and I had a really great experience. And I worked with our vice president for student affairs, and she became my mentor. And I had office jobs where I started to understand that, wait, this too is a career. And around the time of me doing some internships in public education, K through 12, or actually it was 6 through 12 settings, I realized that, and perhaps at this point it was emotionally immature of me, but I realized that being in front of a classroom and teaching the same content 8 times a day, 6 times a day, whatever it happened to be, it wasn't as exciting as it was to watch students over 4 years become young adults, and to really be able to focus holistically on making an impact on a campus community, helping people transition into a college, find a career path or a graduate school, find their interests and passions, really hone that, and then transition out. That became really interesting to me. So I dropped all the other majors. I kept English. And then I decided that was going to be my career. I went and got a master's from Binghamton University in New York in student affairs and diversity, and became a full-time residence life staff member. So I oversaw groups of people living in residence halls, some small 200 student residence hall, then larger communities, and finally settled here at my current institution, where I was in housing operations. And, you say something really interesting. How do you know you want to serve others? My specialty, kind of the skills that I'm really good at, have nothing to do with people. They're technological skills. They're understanding software. I was in housing operations, so I was thinking about, when do these students check in? How can their room be clean and ready for them? When do they check out? How do we manage a room reservation process? All the things that I can do in my head almost by myself, those are the things I do really well. Working with others are things that take a lot of energy, takes a lot of skill building on my behalf to be able to do that with other people. And in about 2 years working here at the college, I realized I wanted to start being involved away from my computer, away from messaging via email. I wanted to start to get to know students some more. And around that time was when this college was launching the personal empowerment course. So it was kind of a in-a-box curriculum that we had from another institution that was willing to partner with us. And I took the course. It was the first semester it was being offered. I took it as a student with someone else as the facilitator. And we use the term facilitator very carefully. We don't use instructor. We don't use teacher or even professor. The person who teaches personal empowerment is a facilitator. They are unlocking the knowledge that's already in the room, and they are really there to hand the microphone from person to person. So I took the class and I realized, this is great. I want to be a facilitator. So I went through some intense training on emotional intelligence, on assessment, on how to integrate students with each other so that they are interacting and sharing, how to build the trust in a classroom. And we implemented that curriculum. Within 2 or 3 years, I became the kind of owner of the curriculum and managed it and implemented some peer-to-peer processes, some opportunities for peers to lead small groups of personal empowerment, and really created it into an institute. And 3 years ago, I had the chance to say, you know what, this curriculum is a little bit outdated now. So we took that it's so much easier to take what was in a box and just facilitate that. We put it aside, and over the course of a summer, really dove into the research out there on emotional intelligence, why emotional intelligence is important for college-age students, and we built a whole new curriculum that is what we've spun off to leadership training, to K through 12, mostly K through 5 settings, as well as creating kind of brave spaces within organizations and within communities related to the LGBTQ population.
That's incredible, Brandon, and we'll be able to really dissect a lot of these topics as we move on. But first and foremost, I love the representation that using facilitator as you're going through it. I think that's an incredible way to try to understand and influence people, and understanding that it's a skill set that you have, but it's just tapping in there and it's just uncovering, the abilities that you have. And it's just trying to show you the way and try to lead you to bring yourself into that direction and that knowledge, which I really love that you said that. I want to start to incorporate that into anything that I'm a part of, because I think that's very important when it comes to topics like emotional intelligence, self-awareness, a lot of these skill sets that are within us, but that they just need to be we need to be led to the direction that you can start to, learn and understand how to use these emotions, these thought processes as we move on.
Sure. Let me add something real quick. The facilitator model is actually really powerful when you're thinking about emotional intelligence and how you feel, right? Because I could teach you the theory behind emotional intelligence, the years, where the prominent research is, but that doesn't build emotional intelligence skills in you. So when we think about a concept in personal empowerment, one of them is, which we'll hopefully talk about later, is cognitive processing and reframing, right? So my goal as a facilitator, every single class, is to only ask questions. So I will open the room, I'll say, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. And then my goal is I will only ask questions. What do you think cognitive processing and reframing is? Now, it's the first time that concept's been introduced, so no one knows the answer. So if I say, well, what if we break it down into 3 words? What does cognitive mean? Someone will answer that question. What does processing mean? Someone will hopefully answer that question. When we get to reframing, maybe no one answers the question. And then I throw in a curveball. Well, if you knew the answer, what would you say, right? And then someone said, well, I would say this. Well, great. You actually did say it. Thank you. There's no hypotheticals here. Now that's my goal. There are times when I have to break into a lecture mode because the room is really quiet. But when you're in that facilitator mode, it puts the onus on that class. That class has to participate. They are the ones that are going to get us through that hour and a half. They know that I am not going to give them the answer. So that's the model that has been really helpful. I just did a workshop this past Friday with 50 educators in upstate New York, and I said the same thing. I am not the expert in the room. You are the expert. My job here is to unlock the things you want to say or the ideas that you have. Someone in this room of 50 people has the right answer to the question I'm going to give. And if you don't, we're going to get there anyway.
That's awesome, Brandon. The ability to ask questions in terms of facilitating and teaching, I think is so important. And I think that is one of the best ways to uncover that. And there's a man named Brian Johnson who has a company that deals with cognitive thinking and processing. And he spoke about it in a podcast with, I forget which podcast it was on, but he spoke about the way that he tries to facilitate learning with his children is he'll only ask questions. So if they're at like the playground or something, he'll ask a question in terms of, what they should do or what they shouldn't do. So he tries to lead them into the direction of understanding, why they shouldn't run on this playscape and why they should, be careful in terms of like this area. So he tries to lead them into the direction of finding out the answer and learning from their experiences, which I think is so important. And that's something that I try to do in terms of some of my relationships. If I know what the answer is, I try to facilitate a question in order to bring out that answer. And I think that's a really cool way that I definitely want to implement within my own children in the future. I think it's a great way because at such a young age, like you're doing with your program, asking questions and leading children or even young adults to start to uncover those answers provides such a better way of thinking than just saying, this is the answer, and then you repeat it back to me. And I think that's why a lot of issues within public education today is happening, because it's just that spit back system, which I don't think uncovers a lot of the way that our brain processes and understands information. So I'm so glad that you do that, because, once you said that, it was like a spark in my head. I was just like, that's incredible. And that definitely creates the most change within someone uncovering emotional intelligence, because I think emotional intelligence is so important and it should be done at such a young age. Because for myself, I didn't start to really work within it 2 years ago. So when I was 21, I was really starting to uncover, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? Why am I having negative thought patterns right now? Why am I sad? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious for what's going to happen in my future? And starting to understand that at a young age provides much more benefit through anything such as bullying or any situations or experiences that you're dealt with as a child within peer pressure or anything. It provides such more growth and comfortability within their life, which I think is so important. And if you want to speak more about emotional intelligence, I think that'd be great. And just as a whole, but as well, why it's so important for children and even young adults or adults to have today.
Sure. I think emotional intelligence it's gotten a bad reputation, right? And that's because it's become almost like a fad. It's an ongoing fad. It's been around for 20 years or something like that, well researched and talked about. You can go to any airport bookstore and find something there right on the end cap to grab and read on a book or read on a plane. And it feels it does feel like it's a little bit soft. And these skills used to be called soft skills, right? But the research out there shows that emotional intelligence, 9 out of 10 top performers, according to Talent Smart, have high emotional intelligence. It's related to your income. The higher your emotional intelligence, the more money you'll make over time. And it's more than half of your job performance is how you interact with people. But that's kind of the the general information out there. It is so well researched, though, in scientific ways. So people with high emotional intelligence tend to use drugs less often, right? People who practice emotional coping and emotional literacy, using more words about how they feel, self-report better relationships with people. Emotional intelligence directly impacts how athletes perform on the field. And when I do resident assistant training, one thing that's really important is there's no other factor, GPA, class year, gender, class participation, that is a significant indicator of job performance than a student's emotional intelligence, right? And in educators, those educators who are able at the end of the day to reflect on how different triggers throughout their day affected them, how they felt when a student had an outburst in class or when a student really succeeded on a test, those are the ones that felt refreshed every single year coming into a new setting. So emotional intelligence or emotional literacy and the ability to cope with emotions is well researched. And probably the most important part of that research is that since the early 2000s, researchers have shown that intervention around emotional intelligence increases the score. So while IQ stays relatively the same for when you're 6, 7, 20 years old, because it's your capacity to learn, and that's almost hardwired in your brain, your ability to communicate around emotions can change. The way you are self-reflective or cope with difficult situations, that can change and can be developed over time. So if emotional intelligence has really great outcomes around job performance and income and your ability to be an athlete and your ability to be a leader, why don't we train those things as well? And that's something that Twin Cities Rise, a company that focuses on personal empowerment as well, they really demonstrated that. So when they instituted a workforce training on workforce skills, how to answer a phone, how to navigate Windows operating system, how to take notes, how to operate a copier, those things didn't lead to their participants getting and maintaining a job for a long period of time. When they switched to focus on self-worth, how to cope with a setback, how to cope with anger, that's what led to, in addition to the employee training, that's what led to employability and maintaining a job over time. And 75% of mental health issues, both severe, moderate, but also things like anxiety and social anxiety, 75% of them are diagnosed by the time a person reaches age 22. So why not try and provide these coping skills around emotional intelligence earlier and earlier in life? And I think you are seeing a lot of K through 12 settings, mostly early childhood settings, taking advantage of that. They might be calling it something different, like social emotional learning. You've seen a huge change in the way high schools used to call guidance counselors, school counselors, guidance counselors, right? How do we guide a student from 11th and 12th grade into college or into the workforce? And now they're calling them school counselors because there's more worth in a student's ability to be reflective and understand how the events occurring around them trigger different types of emotions and how they're in control of those responses.
That's great, Brandon. And you spoke about a lot of great topics in terms of in the workplace, how Twin Cities was able to incorporate emotional learning within their environment. And you spoke about the difference of how schools are trying to incorporate it. But I think, there's a lot of different activities or processes that people are able to develop their emotional intelligence, one being journaling. And I want you to speak about the classes and workshops that you're able to try to uncover some habits and some benefits of emotional intelligence and how you're able to really bring that out of these children and young adults today.
Sure. So in our class, the core concept that we talk about in the very beginning is this idea of cognitive processing and reframing. And the way we envision it is you have an event happens, you can't do anything about that event. The event leads to your thought, which leads to a feeling, the action you choose, and an outcome. But thoughts, feelings, actions, and outcome are all kind of surrounded by your belief systems. So how you think and how you feel is always through a lens of how you were taught to think, how you were taught to feel, that you were taught that boys don't cry, that you were taught that girls had to act a certain way, that you were taught that different sexualities are acceptable and certain ones aren't. All the way you think is an outcome of some of the programming that you have had as a young adult and as a kid. And sometimes you have to, CPR, cognitive processing reframing, is the conscious reflection of those things. Why do I believe the way I believe? And if you come to the agreement, yes, I agree, these are the facts, this is what I want to believe, that's great. But at least we're going to interrogate some of that belief system. And one of the activities that we do is being aware of how you're feeling around a specific event and expanding the words that you have versus the 5 basic emotions that people know, sadness, anger, happiness, disgust, fear, those type of feelings. We know millions of words. When a song comes on the radio that you haven't heard in 5 years, you turn that up and suddenly the lyrics are right back to you. There are millions of lyrics that we know. Why not expand our language around emotion words? So one of the things that we do is, there's this great video of this tennis player. I'm not a sports guy. I don't remember his name. But the tennis player is playing in this match, and the rally is going back and forth. And I show this to the educators just this past Friday. I show it to my personal empowerment students. We watch the video, and when we hit play, we ask them to write down all the feeling words that this person has experienced from the moment I hit play. And then he misses the ball. He hits the ball and it hits the net. So he loses this match, and he takes the tennis racket and he hits his head with it. It causes blood to come out of his head, and we call that the angry outburst. So in that moment is the angry outburst. What do you see? Students will say, well, we see anger. Well, of course you see anger. It's the loudest emotion that we have. It's one of the most visible ones. But what were all the emotions that were happening from the moment we hit play? We asked them to write it down. And they usually start with, well, he was probably frustrated. Okay, well, let's go before that, right? Finally, someone says he's feeling confident. Great. We have confident, come stand up, right? So somebody takes that word, stands up in the center of the room. What did he feel next? Confident, concerned. Great. We have somebody from concerned come up, stand up, and represent concern. And the goal is that we create a lineup of 15 people, 10, 15 people. And we have all the really positive things. And at some point, he started to feel concerned. He started to wonder, question his own ability. At some point, he lost the ball and he felt disappointed. And then at the end, there's this anger. And if all these people are lined up, we then have someone stand at the end of the room. And the way people are lined up kind of, in a lineup, anger is usually the biggest and the person that's up front, closest to our observer. And we say, what do you see? And they say, well, I can only see John, or I can only see Susie, right? The person representing anger. They can't tell that there were 14 other emotions. And the problem, I think, sometimes with educators, with administrators, with parents, myself included, we see the anger, we address the anger that is the 15th emotion, and because we see that anger de-escalate, we feel like we've coped with the problem, and now that's it. And we didn't focus on all the primary emotions that led up to that moment, right? And if we're able to teach a student, a kid, to cope with emotion 4 and 5, maybe disappointment, and funnel that back into how am I going to practice differently? What am I going to do next time I get flustered? We avoid some of the anger that might be harmful to ourselves. And when it comes to kids, visuals are really helpful. So when I welcomed the second graders here on Friday, and I had a group of fifth graders a week or so ago, we had some bottles of water, and we would put food coloring in that bottle. And we'd say, okay, we have a clear glass of water, and I have a blue food coloring. What's something that you might be sad about, right? And they might talk about a pet passing away. They might talk about missing the school bus. And we'll put that blue dot, in that water. It turns the water blue, obviously. And then we'll infuse a solution, and we'll say the solution is a kind of like a bleach alternative, but it neutralizes the blue, right? But we'll say, okay, if we have a blue feeling and we use a coping strategy like breathing, like reflecting, like talking to a trusted adult, we do that right away. What happens? When we infuse that solution, the water becomes clear again. When we add a ton of color, though, sadness and anger and disgust and fear And then, someone's like, well, you could just tell someone a joke. Well, if we add yellow for happiness, it's not going to turn all that dark color back to yellow. When we add a coping strategy to that, it doesn't turn clear right away. It might lighten a little bit, but those emotions are not coped with. They are not dealt with. It takes a whole lot more coping strategy to get that water back to clear than if when we have a primary emotion, we deal with that right away.
I love both those examples and those representations of how you show the way to uncover different emotions, because in the first example, I think it's so important because oftentimes, specifically within people who are struggling within, a mental illness, oftentimes it's always led back to that one negative emotion that is the big framework. So, the depression, the anxiety, the overarching experience that caused harm is always the one that will result over whether they felt a positive emotion or experience earlier in that day or earlier in that event. And I think it's so important that you're able to construct that for them to see that there is more emotions than just that negativity, which I think having that awareness is so important, because oftentimes people always result to that negative thinking when they're in that framework. And what you're doing is saying, yes, no, there is a negative emotion, but we have to see all sides of it. We have to be able to see, there is still light. There is still light at the end of the tunnel. There's still some positive framework to work within, which I think is so important. And then when you bring it to the aspect of a child, I think it's so important because, the first emotion that they feel, it'll always be very, it'll always be brought to the biggest extreme. Whether if they bump their knee or bump their leg, they're always going to think, I'm in a huge emotion of pain or suffering, and it's a negative experience. But if you're able to provide that other insight for them, they're able to see the other side of things, which I think is so important. And having that awareness, I think, of how you're able to show them, the visual aspects of an experience that they might have within their life is so important. And self-awareness is another skill that I think is very important in understanding just, knowing who you are and how you want to orchestrate your own life, how you want to interact with people. And I think it does similarly go hand in hand with emotional intelligence in terms of just being aware of your thinking, your actions, and your emotions as you go throughout the day. So if you want to speak about self-awareness and, even why is it important in terms of the self-development and personal development aspect, because in order for us to want to grow, develop, and change, we need to understand what's positive and negative about our learning, our actions, and try to figure out where we can improve upon our own life in terms of our learning and our whole development process.
Sure. A lot of the researchers around emotional intelligence have lots of different domains. Some say there's 15, some say 20, but the popularized version of emotional intelligence boils it down to 4: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and then social management. But that's not necessarily managing or regulating other people. It's more about how are you contributing to a situation? How can you interact with people to hopefully empower them or to ensure positive outcomes to the extent possible? Self-awareness is all about how do you interact with yourself? What type of events trigger different type of emotions in you? How do you respond to something? Are you more reactive? And how can you be more responsive? It's also what words do you know around emotions? How can you be articulate when you're faced with a failure? How do you react? How do you choose to move forward? It's really about the thoughts that you're having in your own mind. So, you mentioned earlier the idea of being reflective in journaling. I think that's really powerful. At the least, being reflective in a moment is the first step, right? So I'm at the grocery store, and I'm feel my heart is racing, and I'm getting really angry, and my facial expressions are starting to feel angry, and I'm starting to roll my eyes. Wait, why am I doing that? Okay, I've had a long day. The person cashing me out is taking a little bit longer than I would like, but I want to be going home. Well, is 5 minutes really going to make a difference once I get home? Probably not. I'm going to have the same conversations. I'm not missing anything at home. So self-awareness leads us into self-regulation. Okay, self-regulation. How am I going to instead make this as pleasant as possible? Can I ask this person how their day's going versus just breathing really heavily and showing my disgust at the moment? Can I use empathy as a tool for myself? So it's really important to empathize with other people because it builds a relationship. It shows the other person you understand what they're going through, or that you're at least trying to understand what they're going through. You may not have experienced it, but that you value their feelings and their the outcomes that they're having. But empathy is really good for yourself because you can give that person the ultimate grace, whether or not what the story you're making up in your mind is true. So that cashier, maybe they've spent the entire day there and they're just really tired as well. Maybe they didn't sleep all night because their baby was up. So this is causing them to be a little bit sluggish. Maybe the computer's just really slow, or they've had some negative feedback today. You can create a story that allows you to be empathetic with someone because that might be the case. There's a really good video out there. It talks about the road rage where you're beeping the horn at someone because they're going 10 miles below the speed limit and you just have a place to go. Well, you don't know what's going through that person. Maybe that's their first time on the road after a really terrible car accident. And now, in order to face their fear and move through that fear, they need to drive 40 in a 50. And that's what's getting them, and they should be applauded for that. So empathy is a really great way to regulate your own intense emotions. I think the other part about self-awareness that I think is really important, particularly in kids, is them understanding that they are experiencing a high level of emotion right now, and that they'll move through that. They'll get through that. When my kid wanted to play guitar, which she asked for a guitar for Christmas, she got a guitar, and she was uber excited about that guitar, right? So her emotion on the excitement level was at 100. Then she was equally at 100 when she was disappointed because she thought she knew how to play the guitar without a single lesson, and she was ultimately angry that she couldn't play the guitar, right? Self-awareness is, well, why are you angry about that? Okay, great. Well, one time when you didn't know something, like using your 5 times tables, for example, you had to learn how to do that, right? And now you know your 5 times tables. So what can we do to replicate that outcome around this guitar, right? Self-awareness is being able to recall all those other past failures, or past times where you had to practice, or past times when you dealt with a difficult emotion, and use those experiences as a coping skill or as an opportunity to regulate the now. So self-awareness is ensuring that nothing comes because of luck, that you have practiced, you have put the effort in, and trying to understand what you did then so that you can apply it now.
That's great. It's so important, and I loved your example of saying, of trying to put yourself into the other person's footsteps and into their shoes to try to see their perspective of the situation. And that's something that I've been really trying to do as I've been interacting with people throughout this past year, because the way that you interact with someone is so important, that you provide a full amount of effort and a full amount of gratitude and respect and care. And you have to understand, if someone's coming at you in the wrong frame of mind, it may not be because they want to, but it's because a certain situation or experience that they went through. And I really love that you brought that up, because it's very important to understand that not everybody's going to be 100% full, devoted, respected, caring person at the moment that you interact with them. And it's understanding that, people go through these situations and these experiences, and we have to do the best that we can in this moment. And we can always be better or learn from our instances or our mistakes as we move on. So it's all a learning curve. And And I was glad that you brought that up. And then when you're talking about how you're using these past experiences to benefit your present moment, I think is so important. And it does lead to the other side of this argument, of which I want to talk about, is a lot of times, especially as you're dealing with young adults through the college age, past experiences or trauma, or these negative patterns could happen from past experiences. And I want to ask you of how can these past experiences impact and dictate a lot of how a person can think in their present today, and maybe how can they work through that, and how can they better understand that their past is an experience back then and it should not impact the way that they're living in the present moment.
Sure. I think you're right. I think even a 6, a 12, a 20, and a 30-year-old, they have a limited amount of time to compare an event that's happening them to right now to their history. So a 6 and 7 and 8-year-old really probably only have 4 years of memories that they can recall. So when their goldfish dies, that's their first death maybe, right? It's the first thing that they're thinking about. So they don't have, this is a huge thing. And for a parent, it might be an inconvenience because they now have to go get a new goldfish possibly, but they have to deal with that, right? And you as a parent at age 20, at age 30, age 40, you recognize that goldfish don't last very long, right? You recognize that this isn't a pet that's going to last forever. This is not the death of a loved one. But to that child, it is a death of a loved one, right? And so they don't have the years to juxtapose, right? So they don't have the success to go back and say, well, you know what? I'm having this failure or negative event now, but I had a similar event and I got through it okay. Even at age 12, 14, there are new environments every single few years, right? You're moving to a different school. You're starting junior high, you're starting high school, you're switching the way you were taught. You're going from a single classroom to content-based classrooms, right? There's so much transition there that it all feels new all the time. So when something happens, if you don't have the memory to connect it to. So instead, like we've talked about earlier, it feels just so intense in that moment. And when you're 30 or 40, you might be able to say, you know what? A friend decides to stop, or a friend is talking about you behind your back. You can say, right, that means that this person is not a good person in my life. And I've had really great people in my life. And in the past, 10 years ago, I had a really negative person and I was able to remove that person from my life and detach, and I'm okay, right? But when you're 14 and somebody's talking behind your back, suddenly it's your reputation and it's a very big thing. You don't have the same experience to juxtapose. I think that the CPR model we talked about earlier, how you what you believe about yourself is shaped by those past experiences. So when you fail a math test, right, you are suddenly not good at math, versus saying, what can I do to get better at it? I think that's why I got into education, what personal empowerment is all about, is teaching people that instead of saying, I'm not good at math, is to add the word yet, right? I'm not good at math yet. What can I do to be better at math? And most of the time when we say I'm not good at something, it means I'm not as good as another person because I'm comparing myself to that person, versus just doing what I can do to positively move kind of on a path. And one of the recommendations I have to educators and people I work with is when people do, because these years are so formative at age 7, at age 12, when people have a good experience and they've done something really well through practice, they have a good outcome, don't just fall on the easier affirmation. Don't just say, good job, or yeah, you're really good at math, or that must have come naturally to you. You're really good at baseball. Instead, say something like, good job watching that ball and swinging at the right moment. You timed that really well, right? Because that shows that it was a skill that person was able to practice. And then the next time they might be able to apply that skill to a new experience that they're having. So when you think about the Common Core and math and manipulating numbers, right? Instead of saying, yeah, you got the right answer, great job, you manipulated those numbers really well. And last week you weren't able to do that, and you remembered to carry the one that time. That's really important when you're trying to solve this type of problem, right? You'll become better at that the more you practice, and then the next time you have a time text, those answers will come more easily to you, versus I either know the answer or I don't. And if something does come naturally to something, I do think some people are able to pick up math a little bit easier than other people. Some people, it takes a lot of practice to get to that 95, while someone else might only need to study for an hour to get to that 95. You can say, you seem really interested in that, or good job reviewing those notes, even if only for a few minutes. That really paid off. I think that helps us combat really trait-based belief systems. I'm good at math. I'm not an athlete. Those are really negative belief systems and trait-based belief systems that can be detrimental to people. So when you call out the behavior that you see, that allows that student, that kid, the adult, to apply it to something that they may be faced with in the future.
I love that. I love the way that you try to use affirmations, because I think the way that you speak and value someone's abilities and the way that they go throughout their day is so important, because just those extra frameworks of the sentence allows for them to see that they actually are, worth the communication, worth the effort, and they actually actively got there by practice and by working through their experiences. And it's so important, not only just for their beliefs within themselves, but throughout that relationship between you both. I think affirmations are one of the best things to do, even to do for yourself. When I was younger, I had a lot of self-doubt, and I thought very negatively about myself, and affirmations have been one thing that I've been practicing. It's, creating a different awareness of yourself and trying to reframe the way that you see yourself and the way that you respect yourself as a person, which is so important. And by you doing that as you're teaching, allows for the children and young adults to say, all right, I actually am worth it. I actually am of value, which I think is so much more important, because if you just have that affirmation of good job, or a lot of people with thank you and you're welcome, like, people will just say these short framed sentences, and it's kind of just like they're in like robot mode. They're just saying, all right, good job. And it's just kind of, they're reiterating this, and it's not really providing much benefit, where, like you were saying, if you extend that sentence out, it's so much more impactful, which I love that you do. And I think hopefully more people listening and that are impacted by your work create that more often throughout school systems and just interactions and relationships today, because that is definitely a very big value that can be implemented within conversations and teaching and any type of interaction that can happen today. And as we've been focusing our topics more upon the work you do with children, you created that shift, and I think the shift is very important to speak about, in terms of, you started off trying to incorporate young adults within their college education, but then you switched more to a younger audience. And I think it's definitely very valuable, because the earlier you start, I think you can provide much more impact. And our future generations, I think, are so important to create change and value in, because, they're the leaders of our future. And that's why I try to focus a lot of my work on within the younger audience. I still try to provide a lot of my insights and knowledge within an older audience as well. Anybody I like to communicate with and try to connect and incorporate any of these values that I like to focus on in topics. But, why did you have that change from an audience of college students to a younger audience of childhood education for this self-empowerment and emotional learning?
Sure. I think there are a few things. One, at first it was, hey, we're going to have all these second graders. A few years ago, these second graders are going to visit campus. Can you do something with them? Sure, we could figure something out. And we did. But then it was also seeing my daughter kind of struggle with the use of emotional literacy and what she was willing to communicate. I did a workshop with a bunch of kids a few weeks ago, and I said, let's just say you're on the bus and you forgot to eat breakfast. How do you feel, right? And they gave a word: hungry, sad. You get to school, you forgot your homework. How do you feel? They gave me a word, right? You get to lunch and it's something you hate. How do you feel? They gave us the word. You got on the school bus at 3:00 and someone's in your seat. How do you feel, right? So they had all these negative feelings, and it was actually that same experiment where we're adding all the food coloring. I said, out of curiosity, when you go home and see your parent and they ask you how your day was, what do you say? They're like, fine. We say it was good. And it's because they don't have that language of how to have that conversation. So I decided that I wanted, if working in higher education meant that once I'm starting to empower a positive belief system and self-worth in college age students, that means they've already had 18 years of something that might not have been great, right? I was dealing with some really negative thought processes in my personal empowerment class. So I said, why not take what has been successful in our kind of once a year field trips and turn that into tangible products that an educator can use to allow someone to cope with negative feelings when they're disruptive in the classroom? What are some specific lesson plans I can teach an educator to allow them to play games around feeling words that builds up a student's language bank, their vocabulary up? And so I also created these feeling cards, which are 5 to 8 different games that a kid can play with, but they're all your basic games like Go Fish or just other kind of games. And it wasn't necessarily the game that they're playing, but the fact that they're repeating these words over and over again. They're seeing these facial expressions over and over again on these cards. And I'll remember that I spent, when I got kind of the first order of all the feeling cards, my daughter and I were test guinea pigs, right? So we were playing some of the games, and about 20 minutes she was done. That was fine. But one of the words there was frustrated. And I had never heard my daughter use that word before. But one of the words on the feeling cards was frustrated. We played the game, whatever. At the end of the evening, I was putting my daughter to bed. We went through her story. She laid in bed. I was kind of patting her back. But then I was being goofy, and I was kind of like poking at her shoulder right as she's trying to fall asleep. I don't know why I was doing that. And she's like, Dad, right now you're really frustrating me. And I looked at her and I said, did you learn that word today? And she said, I did. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. And she said, a minute went by silently. And then she said, it would be really nice if all kids had feeling cards on their desk at school, so that if they felt uncertain or sad to share their feeling word, how they feel with a teacher, they could just put that card out on their desk. That would be really nice. And so once she said that, I said, this is a really great stream, a great audience stream for me. It's not, you used the word earlier, switch. I think it's kind of a collaborative and comprehensive approach to social emotional learning. I want kids to feel empowered. I want higher education students, undergraduates to feel empowered. And I want leaders who are leading a team to feel like they are able to demonstrate the value that their employees, that their staff, that their communities have. So it's kind of all really important to me.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. And it's very commendable that you started off with just one frame, and then you were able to see that you were able to incorporate that with so many different other aspects within your work. And I think it's so important and so valuable that you're able to learn and understand what you're passionate about through people around you and through your own experiences. So for yourself, you learned it through your daughter. And for me, for my own instances, a lot of why I'm so passionate about mental health and other topics I like to speak about is drug addiction and homelessness, is because those are topics that were impacted me and people around me. And I think when you get that insight and that value from other people around you, I think that's awesome that your daughter shared that tidbit that, you should have this on everybody's desk, because that one little piece of insight of, her learning that day provides, so much more knowledge and so much more value for the work that you continue to do. and it brought you and created that much more inspiration for you to want to continue the work that you do. And I think what you do is incredible. And I really, before I ask my last question, I want to offer this time for you to speak about anything within your empowerment classes or workshops. If there's, I know you spoke about some of the activities that you go through, but if there's a specific one that you are very passionate about that you'd like to share, or if there's any tips or lessons that you would like to offer to the audience today, please share that with us.
Sure. I think the biggest one that we kind of touched base on is this idea of empathy as a tool. And it sounds really selfish, right? To be like, you should use empathy, which is really important for connecting with other people, as a selfish tool for yourself. But in reality, it is a way for you to imagine and place yourself into the imaginary shoes of somebody else. And if they're going through something really difficult, if they came up to you, if that cashier I mentioned earlier came up to me and told me her whole life story, I probably would have been sympathetic. I would have been kinder, right? If a student who didn't participate in class came up to me beforehand and said, you know what, I'm just feeling a little down. Here's what just happened to me. I got a phone call from my parent. I'm going to be a little bit quiet today. That would change the way I interacted with that student, right? So why not kind of, when somebody is having a negative reaction to something, a negative belief, why not go ahead and make up that story yourself so you can produce some empathy, and then maybe interact with that person and ask what's really going on, right? So you have the story down. But empathy is helpful for giving grace. One of the other things that I do, you mentioned affirmations earlier. I think the messages we tell ourselves is probably really important, and they're not always true. That's something that I would keep as a tidbit as well. That as much as we have affirmations that we tell ourselves, we also have some really toxic inner gossip that's going on inside our mind. It's these rumors that we tell ourselves that are probably not true. We say, oh, that person, whispering to other person, they're probably whispering about you. One of the things I talk about is at the end of every workshop I give, I have this initial gossip queen in my mind that tells me, get out of the room as quickly as possible. They are going to find out you were a fraud and that you can't answer half of the questions that they have. I have to train myself that is just natural. I have this imposter syndrome sometimes, and there may be a question that I won't know the answer to. And what an awesome challenge to be asked that question and then to learn the answer so that next time I have it, right? So I think the idea of affirmation is really important. One of the activities I do is I show a variety of different videos, but one is this video of this young woman at various stages of her life about to do something, right? She's about to step onto a stage, and then the video cuts. It's a bunch of vignettes. She is about to enter a boardroom at her employer, and the video cuts away. She sees her partner talking to somebody else, and then the video cuts away. And we stop the video there, and we ask them, what's the inner gossip queen saying, right? And we share that as a group. This is what the inner gossip is. Oh, she's better than you. Oh, these people are never going to listen to you. You only got this job because of X, Y, Z. Other dancers are more qualified than you. Then we ask them, what are you going to combat that with, right? What's the affirmation? I'm going to say, I've practiced a really long time for this. I'm here now. I might as well do the audition no matter how much I've practiced or didn't practice. I researched all this work. It doesn't matter what he thinks of other people. I know my self-worth, right? All these different things. And then we play the rest of the video to see how it's going to turn out. One thing I share with participants in workshops, but also students in higher ed, is not to have toxic affirmations, though. Sometimes we'll say things like, mind over matter, you can do it, you'll get over it, you can do it, just be positive. And those types of affirmations can be harmful because, again, it doesn't focus on the skills we talked about earlier, and it's not really empathetic. So instead of just giving someone a blanket affirmation when they're going through something negatively, say something like, I've seen you go through some really hard things before. This seems to be one of those things. How could I be helpful? What would you tell me if I was going through a similar situation? A lot could go wrong. What could go right, right? It's all of the statements that we've talked about today can be easily done if you're in automatic mode. You'll get over it, mind over matter, good job. When we're in automatic mode, we feel like we're doing a good thing, but we might be being harmful. Be thoughtful. It's exhausting to be thoughtful, and give yourself grace when you're not. But if 5 out of 10 times throughout the day you could provide a thoughtful affirmation to someone, do it at least 5 out of 10, because that's better than none out of 10.
I love that perspective, Brandon, and I think that offers great value for how people should go about their interactions and their conversations. It's so important to have that value and have that grace and care as you go throughout your day. And, like you were saying, the 5 out of 10 times, just having that awareness of offering that insight for that time is so much more valuable than not offering anything at all, which I love that you brought out. And for my last question, it's going to be a little intuitive about your own life. And what I like to ask is, if you were to write a book about your life, and it would have chapters about specific time periods and time frames out of your life, I want to ask what the chapter would be called about your past year or two. So what you've been able to experience throughout this time, is there a specific lesson or value that you've been able to uncover, whether it's positive or negative? What were you able to learn over this past year or two, and what are you bringing to the table today in your present moment?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. It's really been interesting. When you asked that question about the timeline, I initially just thought of since January, and there was a mindset that changed for me in January. So, and it was over the past, I've done workshops for quite a long time. The first kind of workshop on personal empowerment I gave outside of my college was probably 5 years ago, to a group of student leaders. I know exactly where it was. And I've done other workshops, and it was always people I knew, right? It was people that said, "Oh, Brandon, you're a really good speaker, or you're a good facilitator, or you do this thing around personal empowerment. Come." Great. January, there was a mindset switch that the message that I have, and it's a message of other people, this idea of unlocking the wisdom that they have already and just having them be a little bit more self-reflective, that I could get that to more people if I just believed in myself, that the message I had was worth it, and that I'm worth my effort, right? I've always been encouraging people to give their top effort, to try their best to practice at different things. But for me, I was just going with the flow. So since January, I have been, I am worth my own effort. And that's kind of a statement that I've told myself, that doing a little bit extra, doing some cold call emails to people, right? Talking about new types of presentations that I want to do, and reaching out to people that I've never interacted with before, such as, say, agreeing to do a podcast, right? I'm worth the effort to put into this, to grow this message, to grow kind of my business, but also just this whole idea of empowerment to others. It's been kind of a powerful mindset switch for me. And it happened in January. I don't know if it was related to a resolution. I've never been one for a New Year's resolution, but that was the timing. And I can say that I'm proud of the outcomes, but I'm more proud of just the effort that I put into this, to be reinvesting in myself.
Well, thank you for that, Brandon. I appreciate that response, and I'm so glad and grateful that I was able to interview you as you're going through that experience, and as you're able to uncover your own, values and your own approach to how you go about your work, because I truly think the work that you do is commendable. I really enjoy that you teach emotional learning, because I think that's one of the very few topics that should be in place in schools worldwide. I think it's such a profound topic that kids need to learn, and it should be up front in terms of the topics and the themes that we're teaching our kids today, because it provides insurmountable value compared to them knowing how to do math or science. It's a skill, and it's a framework that can benefit them in all aspects of their life. And it's something that they can benefit and grow from every single year of their life, which is so important. So I really want to thank you for coming on to this podcast today. It was really a pleasure to interview you and speak more about the programs that you do and what you're offering kids, young adults, and everyone today through the work of self-empowerment, and through all aspects of any type of gender, race, class. It's very powerful to inspiring to hear that you're so passionate about not only one group but everybody, and you want to provide value to everybody and show that they are worth it, and they really they have the tools and the skills to be anybody who they can be, and you're helping to uncover and pull that out of everybody and show them that they are worth it, and they have the tools and the skills that anybody else could have in this world. So I really appreciate the work that you do, Brandon, and I'm so happy that we were able to make this happen. And I just want to really appreciate you for what you do. And I'm going to have all the links to your work and all of the, workshops, so people can really get a better sense of what you're doing today. They can get in contact with you and try to connect and hear more about what your work is doing. And hopefully we can start to build out programs that are similar to yours across other platforms and other areas throughout the country and places today, because I think it's very important that you're doing the work that you're doing. So I just want to thank you again, Brandon. It was really a pleasure to speak with you and learn more about the work that you do.
Thank you for having me.